Okay, welcome. So yesterday we started a certain time period. It's called the 3 weeks. It started with the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and it goes on until Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which is really the saddest day of the year for the Jewish people. It's the time of the destruction of the first and second temple, and also lots of other tragedies that happened to the Jewish people during that time period. So this is a sad time period of year, but when we talk about a fast or when we talk about something sad, it's only there. It's called, in fact, Bein HaMetzorim. This time period is called the time of the constraints. We're constrained. And in Judaism, anytime there's something sad or something constrained, it's always there for a purpose. And the purpose is what's to come, what we can do with it, to use it as an opportunity for growth. So anytime in Judaism sadness is not there just for a reason, it's there so that we can grow from that sadness and develop into something even better. And just like when we say, any of you now in the summer, any of you use the hose for your kids or your grandkids, to spritz the kids, right? Any of you ever hold that hose tight and suddenly it stops, the whole thing stops, right? My granddaughter was stepping on it yesterday and the whole thing just stopped, right? And then after it stops though, the part that comes out is like a real big spritz, right? And that's why they do that, because they want to really get you all spritzed outside. So that's the same thing with this time period. It's the time period that constrains, that's kind of holding us tight, squeezing us, but for the purpose of that after that time period, there's that spritz that follows, that meaning there's this tremendous flow that follows. And that's why we know that Mashiach is actually supposed to be born on Tisha B'Av, on the saddest day of the year. And that's the reflection of how this day has within it, has within it the potential for so much more. So we're constraining, we're thinking about the sadness, we're mourning. It's a time period of mourning. It's a time period where we don't do happy things, we don't make weddings, we don't listen to music, we don't do things that are really joyous activities, because we're trying to tap into the potential of what can be. So we're mourning over something negative, the fact that we don't have the temple here, the fact that we're not in the time period of Mashiach, and then we're trying to channel that sadness, that mourning, into something constructive so that we can actually build the Beit HaMikdash. And that's why it's a custom to learn during this time the laws of the Beit HaMikdash, the laws of building the Beit HaMikdash, because out of that constriction, that sadness, that mourning, we want to develop it into something positive, into something joyful. It's really truthfully, it's anxiety is supposed to be the same thing. The reason why you're anxious about something, or the reason why you feel pain. A person feels, we have nerves, you touch something hot, you're pained by it, right? What's the point of the pain? The pain is to remind you, don't touch that hot thing, right? Stop from touching it. And when we're anxious, the same thing. There's a reason why we're feeling anxiety. It's in order to stop and to think, what is really bothering me? And how can I use that agitation that I'm feeling to change my situation, to change my circumstances? So we're agitated about something, we're feeling anxious about something. The point of that anxiety is that, how can I change things? How can I stop it from being that way? If we wouldn't feel that anxiety, or if we wouldn't feel that anxiousness, it wouldn't be positive, because we would just let our situation keep going. And that's the same thing with pain. If we wouldn't feel that pain, we would keep our hands, God forbid, on the burner, and God forbid what kind of results that would happen. So we feel the pain, and feeling the pain, though, isn't just because we're feeling pain, we want to be sad, we want to be very mournful during this time. No, we feel the pain in order to change it. So we feel the pain, we feel the anxiety, we feel the fact that we are now in exile, and then we think about what we can do in our lives to make our world a better world, to make our world a more redemptive world, to make ourselves more redemptive people, to get in touch with that redeemed part of ourselves, because as soon as we redeem that part of ourselves that needs to be redeemed, and everyone does likewise, we're living in a different world. We're living in the world of Mashiach. So that's what this time period is all about. And really this idea of change and how each person can be the impetus for change in themselves and in the world at large is reflected very much in this week's Torah portion. And the Torah portion has something in it about the daughters of Tzelafchad. Any of you hear about the daughters of Tzelafchad? Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, who were they?
Surviving daughters of whoever that person was who just who, and they wanted to, not commission, what's the word? They petitioned Moshe to get the land that was originally their father's because there's no heirs, there were no sons.
Exactly, excellent. Hello. So yes, so the names of these 5 daughters are actually written in the Torah, and they are Machla. I don't know them by my heart, so I'm going to read it. Machla, Noah, Chagia, Milcah, and Tirzah. 5 daughters, and their names are repeated a couple of times. So they're standing before Moshe and the entire congregation, and they are saying to him, "Our father died in the desert. He died here in the Midbar, but he was not in the assembly that banded together against God in Korach's assembly, and he had no sons. So why should our father's name be eliminated from his family because he had no son? Give us a portion along with our father's brother." So these 5 women were very courageous women. They were brave women, and they're going to try to make a change. They're saying the laws of inheritance, the laws that Moshe was about to do, he was about to apportion the land, and the portions of the land went according to your father and your great-great-grandfather and so forth. That's how the portions went. It went according to the tribes. Each tribe got a certain section, and then within the portion that each tribe had, it was further sectioned off according to the family. Now, interestingly, the daughters of Tzelafchad, it traces back their heritage all the way. It says that they were from the tribe of Menashe, and it traces back. Menashe was, of course, the son of Yosef, and it mentions Yosef here. And the reason for that is because the tribe of Menashe was supposed to get part of their inheritance was on the other side of the Jordan River. So they came to Moshe and they asked, can we have a portion of land on the other side of the Jordan? So really, these daughters could have had a portion on the other side of the Jordan, because that was not done by God. That was just a portion by Moshe, and they would have received this portion. But they were asking for something more. They said, no, it's not good enough for us to have a portion on the other side of the Jordan. We want to have it in the part of Israel proper, the land of Israel proper. And this was because of their tremendous love for the land. We love the land so much, we want to have a portion of land inside the land of Israel. And that's why it traces them back to Yosef, because he loved the land of Israel so much that he made his brothers swear when they left Egypt. He says, please swear to me that you're actually going to take out my bones and bring them up to the land of Israel. And similarly, these daughters also loved the land of Israel. And it's interesting because we just went through, the last Torah portion, a couple portions ago, we did the Meraglim, the people who went to the sea to spy the land. And we said they had no interest in going to the land. They were complaining about the land. They were saying, where did you take us? And the Jewish people throughout these portions throughout these parshiot keep on complaining, where did you take us? Did you take us to this midbar to die? Are you taking us? We don't want this. We don't want the land of Israel. Take us back to Egypt. And these daughters, these 5 very intelligent women, are saying the contrary. They're saying, we want to go into the land of Israel. We have such a desire, such a love for the land. We want even a portion for the land. Please let us have a portion in the land. So this is, something that we see, that these women were very aware of the holiness of the land. And while the generation of men were complaining about going into the land, these women were hoping and petitioning and asking for a portion of the land. So let's look a little about what they were saying. Sure.
It was Ephraim and Manasseh who wanted the portion in Israel, or was it just Manasseh?
It was um, it was Menashe. It was Menashe. It was half of the Shevet of Menashe, actually. Yeah, that wanted that portion. So what these women were actually saying as well, what was their, welcome, what was their argument to Moshe? And the commentaries and the Talmud talks about their razor sharp intelligence and how they came to Moshe and they gave such a good argument that he didn't know what to say. He said, let me go ask God. And we see from there that this, when you want to make change, you need to know the information really well. If you want to make change in your world, you need to know your facts really well, study your facts really well. They knew their facts really well. They knew the laws very well. They studied it, and they came and said, they tried to make the change in a practical way, not in a theoretical way. This is a practical situation that we're coming to you about. Give us a law. And yet they also said, ask God. We surrender to God. Meaning they didn't want it just because this is what we want, but they wanted it because only if this is what God wants of us. If this is what God wants of us, then we want the land. But we are coming to ask for this petition. So this really teaches us something about when you want to make change in life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon, but when you want to make change in your circumstances, in your surroundings, and things around you, it teaches us how to be that trailblazer, how to make change, how to make an impact, know your information really well, know the facts really well, come and make a practical suggestion. This is what we want, this is the outcome that we want, but at the same time surrender to God, to whatever God's will is. I'm going to try to make the difference, I'm going to try to do something, but I surrender to God. And finally, the most important thing is really believe that you can make a difference, right? They came before Moshe, who was the greatest prophet of all times, the wisest man who of all times, and they approached him and they said, we're coming, we're asking you, we're petitioning to you to give us a portion of the land. And through them, we discover a new law in the Torah. God says they are right in what they're saying, and this is what the law is. So often we think, like, who am I to make a difference? Like, little me, come on, really? Like me? Come on. And who should I should go to the Moses. I should go to these people who are so educated, these people who are so well versed in things. Who am I to do it? And yet we're told you do have to have the confidence. Do it in the right way, do it in the right format. But yes, have that confidence to do it, because these women approached Moshe, and it's through them that we have this new law being discovered in the Torah, specifically through them, through these women, because they decided that they want to make that change. So what was what is it that they said? So they said to Moshe that, when we were learning several weeks ago, we learned about Rus and we learned about Nitzeves. So we learned then about this law called Yibum, that when a person dies, when a man dies, and he has no children, then it's a mitzvah for his brother to marry his widow in order to perpetuate the name of the deceased, in order so that he can have some children, so he doesn't die completely childless, but that there are children that are born. If they don't want, there's another procedure that's called chalitza, which we spoke about, but what were they trying to say now to Moshe? They said to Moshe, our father died in the wilderness, and we're going to get to in a minute why he died, but our father died, and he had no sons, but he did have daughters. So if he has no sons, then if he has no children, then the laws of Yibum apply. So if you consider us like not having a child, then the laws of Yibum should apply, and his brother should marry our mother in order to have children, and then his inheritance, his portion of the land will pass to these children. But if you say that his brother should not marry our mother and do the laws of Yibum, then you need to count us as his children. We're daughters, but nevertheless we should inherit the portion that my father should have gotten, and therefore we deserve a portion of the land, because otherwise our father is not being given any portion. So either you treat him like he had children, or you treat him like he didn't have children. If he had children, then we're the children. Give us a portion. If he didn't have children, then our mother should have yibum with his brother, and in that way perpetuate the name of the deceased, and any children that they have should go to the inheritance should be to them. So this was really like a kind of a Talmudic argument, like a very legalistic argument that these women presented before Moshe, and he was stumped. It says that he forgot the law in order for them to be having the merit of the law coming out through them. And the law was indeed the way they said it. Now, when we look at who was this Tzelafchad, who was this father, they made it very clear, our father died not because he was part of the Korach assembly fighting against Moshe, and not because he was part of the whole Meraglim episode. He didn't die because he didn't want the land of Israel. He died because of his own sin, and they didn't elaborate what was his own sin because they were talking in front of Moshe and the whole congregation of Israel, so it wasn't really respectful to talk about why their father died. But the commentaries do comment, why did he actually die? And this was about, we're now in the year 38 of the time period that the Jews are in the desert. There's 40 years that they're in the desert. This was in the second year. So we're talking about like almost 38 years ago that he actually died. What happened? It was on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, that we spoke about the saddest time period for the Jewish people. And we see that this time period has been sad throughout all of history. So what happened on the 9th of Av? It was on the 9th of Av that the Meraglim came back and the Jewish people were crying about going into the land of Israel. And God said, I will really give you now. You know how sometimes mothers say, you're crying, I'm going to give you what to cry about. Well, God kind of said that, not exactly, but God said, you're crying and you're going to see, you don't want to go into the land of Israel, so stay here. You're not going to go into the land of Israel. I'll give you exactly what you want. You don't want to go in, you're going to stay here. Now, when the Jewish people heard that, obviously they afterwards regretted it and they realized how wrong they had been. But when they heard that, many of them started to think, well, maybe if God said that, we're not really anymore God's chosen people. He's saying that, maybe that means that we're not his chosen people, and if we're not his chosen people, we don't have to keep his laws like the chosen people do. And some of them became lax in some of the laws. This Tzelafchad saw that, and out of self-sacrifice, he wanted to do something that would very strongly turn the tide. And what he did was he started gathering logs on Shabbat, which you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to carry these logs. He started gathering these logs on Shabbat. And he was then sentenced to death because he desecrated the Shabbat publicly with warning and so forth. So he really was doing something out of his love for the Jewish people. He was trying to show them, you are still God's chosen people. You are still God's nation. Even though we're not going to be going into the land of Israel, God still loves us, and we still are obligated in the mitzvot because we are still beloved by God. And this showed his tremendous love for the Jewish people. That was one commentary that explains it. The other commentary says that he was part of those that after the Meraglim, after the spies came back and said this bad report, and Moshe said, now you're going to stay in the desert for the next 40 years and die here, there was a group of Jews who said, you know what, we made a mistake, we're going to go conquer the land of Israel. We're going to go up to the land of Israel right now. And Moshe told them, don't do it, because you can't succeed without God's help. And if you're just going to go now without God's help, now's the wrong time. You made a mistake, you're going to pay the consequence for it. And they said, no, we're going to go up. And they started to go up, and they were killed. They were attacked by the nations, and they died there, right there in the wilderness. Others say that this was part of those people who tried to go up to the land of Israel and tried to capture the land of Israel, was this Tzelafchad, and he was killed by the other nations who saw them and attacked them. And this again shows his misdirected or misguided, mistaken, but nevertheless love for the land of Israel. He realized that what the Meraglim had done was so wrong, and he still wanted it. He says, I want to go into the land of Israel, I want to get it, and therefore he died for his love of the land of Israel. So whichever the case was, either either of these two commentaries, whether he was the one who gathered the logs on Shabbat and was killed because of self-sacrifice, because he wanted to show the Jewish people, we still are beloved, don't do this, or if he was one of the people who actually tried to enter the land of Israel because of his tremendous love for the land of Israel. He was not someone who was just, part of Korach's assembly or part of the Meraglim. He had a reason. These were the reasons for his death. And his daughters, 38 years later, okay, this is 38 years later, are now portraying that love that he had for the land of Israel, or that love that he had for the Jewish people, and they're petitioning Moshe. So it's really fascinating to see when we are ready to live for our ideals, in his case even dying for his ideals, what gets transferred to our children. That 38 years later, these same women came to Moshe and they said, we want to make this request of this showing their tremendous love for the land of Israel, because they remember that their father had this desire, this tremendous love for the land of Israel.
So if he wasn't part of either of those groups, right, especially with the Meraglim, when God said any man between the ages of 20 and 60, right, we're not going to go. So he wasn't part of that. Assuming he didn't do the other, right, whatever it was, would he have been able to enter the land? Or?
He wouldn't have been able to enter because, everyone was still making this uprising except for Yehoshua and Caleb. Like, no one really stood against them. He wasn't, though, like leading a revolt, or that's what I mean when I say he wasn't part of that group. But no, he wouldn't have been able to go up. But his daughters could have, could go up. So that is who this Tzelafchad is. Now, what I found interesting is that it says Moshe brought their case before God, and this is where we have like a really interesting thing. And this is what God says to him. He says, "Speak to the children of Israel and say, if a man dies and he has no son, you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter." So they were vindicated. Obviously, they were, yay, the women get something, okay. They felt that something was wrong. They petitioned. They won. They came with the right understanding and with the right knowledge, and they presented their case in a very practical way, and they were vindicated. They stepped up to the plate, and they were vindicated. But there's a deeper explanation to this, and I want to go into a little bit of this explanation. When it talks about, if a man dies and has no son, you shall transfer his inheritance to his daughter. So everything in the Torah has a metaphorical, mystical explanation as well. Even the laws that we're talking about, a law, something as basic as this statement that God said, has a deeper mystical understanding. And that's what I want to go into. When God said this, what he was saying to them is something really interesting. We are all involved in the conquest of the land. What does it mean, the conquest of the land? Each and every one of us today, we're conquering the land. The land is something material, it's something physical, it's something very tangible. We're all supposed to be conquering the land in terms of conquering that physical aspect of ourselves, conquering those materialistic part of ourselves to introduce more spirituality into our world. Right? We're all trying to conquer this foreign land and introduce positivity into our world, introduce spirituality into our world, introduce values into our world. We're all on that mission. And how we do it is up to each and every single one of us. As many people as there are here, that's as many ways as there are to conquer our land. And we all have personal lands, personal parts of this world that only we can conquer. Right? It's like we say, the day that you were born is the day that God said, you're needed. I need you. I need you specifically for the role that you have in your little specific land that you are conquering. Now, when we conquer the land, there's really two ways of doing it. And a lot of society, if we look at society from the beginning of all time till today, we're progressing. We're progressing and hopefully progressing in a positive way. So a lot of values, I mean, you see a lot of confusion in our world, but a lot of values that our world started off with, Judaism was there to shine a light, to teach values, to teach the value of the importance of every human being, the contribution of every human being, how every person can make a difference, the importance of the soul, the neshama, how every person has this soul, how God loves each and every one of us. If we look at ancient society, there was such cruelty in society. There wasn't this value. I mean, children were routinely, if they weren't 100% perfect, if something was emotionally or physically wrong with them, they were killed, because this value of a human being, this value of a human life was not sacred. So as we progress in our journey, we are teaching the world, and that's what the Jewish people really are. We're supposed to be a light unto the nations in terms of teaching society, teaching a world, the values of Torah, the values of Judaism, the values of godliness, and bringing this godliness into our world. I mean, in the past, there was no such thing as giving charity to poor people. People who were poor just suffered and died, and nowadays, this idea of charity is something that is universal, and so many universal ideas that Judaism brought and introduced to our world. So really, we are, as a nation, on a mission, and the world is on a mission to get from the darkness to the light, to introduce more godliness to our world. Now, when we're in this way of fighting the darkness, there's really two ways of doing it. And there's a masculine way and a feminine way. The masculine way is what we've seen so much of in the past and in previous generations. I mean, if you look at the way of education, in the past generations, what was the way that we educated? If children didn't listen, you slap them, right? You subdue them, you do something. There was a hierarchy, and there was a way of physical might rules, right? That's the masculine way of doing things, where there's this hierarchy of people, and you listen to the might makes right, right? The feminine way of doing things, which is what our world is slowly evolving into, if we would only be the feminine and that feminine voice, sometimes even the feminine gets involved with the masculine. But the feminine way of doing things is not through conquest, but it's through dialogue. It's not through authority, but it's through persuasion. It's through education, not through force, but educating, nurturing. So really, this masculine and feminine way of doing things. And again, when we say masculine and feminine way of doing things, I know it's not politically correct, because today there's no masculine and feminine. But the truth is, I think people would be so much less confused about the masculine and feminine if we would just realize that most women do things with the feminine way, but there are many women who do things the masculine way, and most men do things the masculine way, but there are many men that do things the feminine way. That doesn't mean that a man is a woman or that a woman is a man if she's acting more feminine or acting more masculine, right? But these are the general masculine and feminine tendencies of how it's done. So the masculine tendency is through a hierarchy. The feminine tendency is through dialogue. And you see this in every aspect of creation. When you're trying to connect two things, something higher and something lower, there's really two ways of doing it. There's bringing down what's high to low, or there's elevating what's low to high. So the masculine way of doing things was authority, the hierarchy. The feminine way is nurturing, bringing up what's low to high. You have this in all areas. If you have, for example, a disease or a sickness, there's really a masculine and a feminine way of fighting it. The masculine way of fighting a sickness is you cut it out, or you take medicine to get rid of it. The feminine way of doing it is strengthen the body. Strengthen the body so that you can then overpower what is negative inside of you. Now, sometimes you need the masculine way, and sometimes you need the feminine way. In the past, the masculine way was the only way. When you're talking about fighting tyrants or fighting people who are out to destroy you or out to kill you, You can't just say, well, let's sit down for a cup of coffee. You know? When you're talking about terrorists who are trying to kill you, there's no let's discuss this. They're shooting and that's it. So the masculine way was so necessary for such a long time period. However, and this is what the mystical dimension, the Chassidus explains that this verse means, that there comes a time in society and in the world at large when the masculine way of doing things is not working or not necessary. And it's then that the feminine has to take precedence. And it's then that the heritage has to go, the inheritance goes to the female. What does it mean? It means that there comes a time when we no longer need to pick up our sword and fight, but when education and discussion and dialogue is far more effective. There comes a time where you no longer need to whip the child or hit the child or teach the child in a way that it's only lecturing down on them, but it's far more effective to have the child learn in a way that they are discovering the knowledge, where they're part of the decision of what they're learning, where you're not forcing them, but they're part of the nurturance is coming from within themselves. And this is what God is saying to Moshe. There is going to come a time, for many, many generations, the masculine way was necessary. But there's going to come a time when the feminine voice is going to supersede the masculine voice. And the feminine voice is necessary. And it's this time that we can see, fascinatingly, when we talk about the journey in the desert, there was many different stops along the journey. This is happening in the 40th year, at the second, right at the stop, right before they're about to enter the land of Israel. That's when this whole episode with Tzelafchad's daughters is coming. Mystically, what it means is that all these different stops along the 40-year journey is what we're going through historically. And we now are right at the cusp of entering the land of Israel in terms of the time period of the redemption. Our world is ready for the redemption. And God is saying to us, at this time, when we're ready to to experience the redemption, it's the voice of the woman that is so necessary. It's the voice of the woman that's so powerful. And we cannot lose our voice. We need to express our voice, express it in the correct way, express it in a way that like these women, these daughters of Tzelafchad did, with logic, with understanding, with knowing the law, with surrendering to God and saying it's up to God and we're going to give in to God, to whatever God says. But we are nevertheless stepping up to the plate. We're going to be those trailblazers, and we're going to be there to petition to Moshe because we realize that we have a significant contribution to make here. So we're at that time period. And, I was really thinking, I think that so much of society has been repressing the women, repressing the feminine voice. And you see this in all areas of society, whether it's secular society, religious society. It's all about repressing the feminine voice, because I think cosmically there's this awareness that the women are responsible for bringing redemption to our world. And somehow this feeling is that, subconsciously of course, that if we can repress the feminine voice or corrupt the feminine voice, then the redemption isn't going to happen. So these forces of negativity and evil are kind of trying to suppress it, whether it be through terrible religious suppression or whether it be through secular society, where it distorts what a woman is, where a woman sells everything, and we take the woman and we cheapen the values, we cheapen her, and we show women for all kinds of advertisement and all kinds of terrible things, where the woman's body and voice has become so cheapened, or the other way, where her voice is just so suppressed that we can't even hear it. I think it's part and parcel of the same force of suppressing her and not allowing that voice to really resonate, to really shine. And it's our job to allow that feminine perspective to shine, because it says that we are the generation that is reincarnations of the time period of the Midbar, of the time period of the desert. And just like the women there were so strong, and the women there were the ones who the men kept sinning, the men kept stumbling with the golden calf, with the spies, with the Korach, with every single thing, one after another. We see the men constantly falling, and it was the woman who stood up and says, like these daughters of Tzelafchad, we want a portion of the land of Israel. Everyone's grumbling about going into the land, and we're petitioning you, we need a portion in the land of Israel. So it's that feminine vision that could stay strong, and that perspective that we can really use to, in our time now, in our society now especially, that voice of nurturance. And sometimes we don't have that confidence, especially as women. We don't feel that confidence to be the trailblazer, to make change. And again, it doesn't have to be like a cosmic change. It doesn't have to be a universal change. Small changes that we make in our own lives have a ripple effect. You know, I like to talk about like the wheel of a bicycle. You know, there's a middle point in the middle. That little middle point, if you just move the wheel a drop, it moves so far, and the effect of it on the spokes is so far out, and it reaches so much further. So we can make that change in our lives by expressing that feminine vision and feminine perspective, and then we can really create tremendous change in our world, because it does say that it's in the merit of the righteous woman that we left Egypt, and in the merit of the righteous woman today in our generation that we will merit the final and complete redemption. So this is really a Torah portion that's very appropriate for this time period during the 3 weeks that we're in. During this time period when we're mourning the redemption, it's an important wake-up call that it's the woman who of today, just like the woman in the desert, who have the keys and the tools to really bring change to our world through our feminine powers, through our nurturance, not through force, but through the education and through the dialogue and through the unique perspective that each and every one of us carries. And as unique individuals, each one of us carries such a different aspect and such a different conquest of the land. Each of us have our own corners. And if we can just change our little corner collectively, we have actually changed the world. Yes. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sure.
I don't know what the connection is, but there's a connection. But Hashem's light, from what I understood, the Shekhinah is a feminine aspect of Hashem.
Absolutely.
So is that connected with what we need to do to bring down the Shekhinah with Moshiach ben Yosef to the world? So is that what we're saying here?
Absolutely. Like, you know, we can't talk about God in terms of feminine or masculine, but you know, when we talk about God, you know, in Hebrew everything is masculine or feminine. So when we talk about God, the Creator, we talk in the masculine way. When we talk about the Shekhinah, which is the divine feminine presence of God, we talk about it in the feminine way. And this part of God is like, it says it's like a mother who's accompanying her children through Galut. The Shekhinah is with us. The feminine presence of God is with us, accompanying us throughout Galut, throughout this exile. And we are trying to make that Shekhinah connected, once again, in a very obvious way with that part of God that's the creative part of God, that's a very noticeable part of God, connected to connect that and create the Shekhinah awareness in our world. So absolutely, it's all connected.
And women in education, and Moshiach ben Yosef is from what I understand, will be the first to come down.
Whoa.
That was so cool. That was so cool. That was really good. That was so Barbara. That was
Ladies, you see the power.
Can I just say something?
Absolutely.
I think it's incredible, what you said about, just take a step back for just a second, that we're the reincarnation of the women of the Midbar. So are you saying like us, like right now,